Baltimore City Council Ways and Means Committee. We are back for ordinance 24-0521, ordinance of estimates for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2025. Eric Costello, councilman from the 11th district, chair of the committee. Councilman Z. Cohen, 1st district. Councilwoman Felicia Porter, 10th district. Vice chair of the committee, Councilwoman Danny McCray, 2nd district. Councilwoman Odette Ramos, 14th district. Councilman Chris Burnett, 8th district, member of the committee. To my immediate right is Tony Leva, staff to the committee. We're joined by representatives from the mayor's office and the council president's office. We are here for mayor's office of human services, homeless services, sorry, long day, or MOHS. Director Simmons, how much time do you anticipate needing for your presentation? I am not going to ask you to introduce first and last name and position title of your senior staff that you have here to testify, because you are a one-woman show today. So I am going to turn it over to you, Director.
Good afternoon to each of you, and thank you very much for having me today. I look forward to giving the presentation as well as taking your questions. So I'll jump straight into it. Thank you. As each of you know, our mission is to make, I'm trying to decide which screen I like the best. Our mission is to make homelessness rare and brief. What we're going to go through in this budget today looks like some of our fiscal 2025 objectives. This budget combines both federal, state, and local funding for MOHS. The budget is broken down to a couple of different categories. You're going to see that clearly I'm the director of the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services. I also will have a deputy chief of staff, chief of partnership, as well as a couple of different levels of support that I'm sure we'll get to throughout the course of this presentation. As you look at 356, which is at the Administration of Homeless Services, this service provides executive leadership and administrative support for the agency. This includes personnel to support the administration and oversight of the federal, state, local funding. Some of those sources include HUD, HOPWA, CDBG, not CDBG. That is not one of our funding sources, but ESG. Our major operating budget highlights for this year looks like we've increased in allocation for laundry and meal services. What that's really about is winter shelter. Last year, what we got to see is our priority is to make sure everyone has a space to go during the cold blue season. What that looked like for us was just increased cost for transportation, as well as laundry, any additional other services. Our budget includes $6 million as a quarter that's allocated for administration. We have about 54 FTEs in our office. Any follow-up questions, just feel free to let me know. Some of the performance metrics that I'm just gonna highlight for our homeless prevention projects looks like we're focused on not only ending homelessness, but how do we divert homelessness as well? So we fund quite a few projects that looks like homeless prevention services. We've been lucky enough to have some ARPA funding, which has been able to drive a lot of this work. And so that metric has looked like the goal of being able to enroll over 600 is the target, but as you can see, our actuals for a lot of that is greatly above what the target is. But this really is focused on how do we eliminate people from even coming into our shelters and our homeless services. So this pillar is really strictly about how do we prevent those that are coming into homelessness by giving some dollars on the front side, giving some support on the front side, and that's really what this initiative is to support. The second one looks like our outreach to homeless services. When you take a look at what we've been able to target 4,000 means that that's just your reality. It's not our intent to be able to encounter 4,000 people that are experiencing street homelessness, but that really is our reality. In fiscal year 2023, we encountered 3,762 individuals that were street homelessness in need of support and assistance. This allocation really helps to support that work. Part of what I like to lift up to people is the city is really the driver of outreach services. There's no funding sources that really wants to support this work, but we recognize how important it is and what's needed on our streets in order to even provide an opportunity to connect people to housing. And so that really what this service is about. The second service line item that you're seeing here is temporary housing for those that are experiencing homelessness. This is about our emergency shelters. If you look at MOHS's allocation, you're going to see that 11 of a million of it is going straight into the emergency shelters. So what we're funding looks like the family shelter, which is at Sarah's Hope for our agency. We also fund a men's shelter, a women's shelter. And so we really pour most of our resources, if not 90% of our resources that we receive, into the emergency shelter system. And then permanent housing for the homeless. This is when you look at what's funded federally. This is our COC projects, this is our HOPWA projects. And these programs are really aimed at those that were once homeless, but how do we provide them with the funding so that they can remain stable in their housing programs, whether that's a COC, which is dedicated, which COC projects means permanent supportive housing for those that are both have the homeless history, but they also have a documented disability. And then the second large driver of this looks like our housing opportunities for people with AIDS. That's also a project that provides both rental assistance, case management, and supportive services. And true to my word, sir, I was going to be less than 10 minutes, so I can just open this up to questions to you all.
Thank you for being punctual. CA Leach, if there's an opportunity for training to other city agency officials prior to budget hearings, Director Simmons would be an excellent candidate to conduct that training. Respectfully submitted.
Thank you, sir.
So I know last year during budget hearings, the committee had a number of questions around the acquisition of the hotels. Very pleased that the administration was able to close that deal and understand that you're working on transitioning these facilities to permanent supportive housing along with support from HABC. Can you kind of bring us up to speed on where that effort is at?
Absolutely. So with the acquisition of the space, first and foremost, we're using it as short-term interim shelter space. So we continue to utilize it for both a men's shelter space as well as a flexible adult couples, families, those that are in encampment space, which is to sleep in. With HABC, this has been a wonderful partnership, to be honest, for the city to be able to have. We've been working alongside the Department of Real Estate, our legal team for both the city as well as HABC's legal team. And the goal is ultimately to release 2 RFPs in the near future. What that's going to look like is the city is currently in the process of drafting and creating this RFP. It's going to have some very specific languages for the developers and that development community, because part of what we've been looking at is making sure that we're including the items that is going to be necessary for this space. It's not just about the building, it's about the services that's going to be provided in it as well. So that RFP is going to include a lot of very particular language for the city to select the right developer / nonprofit organization that's going to operate the space. But in partnership with that, we've been working with HABC, who is going to also release an RFP, and that's going to give the opportunity for the developer that is selected for this project to have permanent vouchers associated with the building. So it is a 2-pronged process that we're really crossing T's and dotting I's in terms of this application process, but ultimately is going extremely well.
Thank you. I want to jump to a different topic. Last year, we raised a number of concerns related to management practices within the agency. I know but I know that those concerns predate your time with the agency. Nonetheless, there were significant concerns that were raised, and the mayor sent a letter to HUD outlining a number of corrective actions that the administration was going to take. I think there were 9 items in that letter dated June 27th, 2023. Since that time, HUD has reached out to us to inform the city of a compliance monitoring review, which I'm just going to refer to as an audit because that's a mouthful, dated April 18th, 2024. I know that in this letter, HUD was requesting within 30 days a number of updates related to those committed corrective actions, including, again, I'll use my own terminology here, an audit entrance conference on June 3rd, which would have been yesterday. In addition, there was a request for some data and information within 7 days of receipt of the letter. And I wanted to see where things are at in terms of meeting these data requests from the auditors at HUD and where we currently are.
Thank you. So for us, we've been clear that this is a little bit different from an audit. What we're calling this is, it's called the fiscal year 2024 program monitoring, but they are doing 2 things in conjunction. As a response to the fiscal year 2020 vouchers, as I came in front of this group before and let you know that HUD was going to give us an opportunity to resubmit all of the vouchers and the requests that the city had made prior. This is a 2-pronged approach for HUD. So now what we've been able to do is resubmit all of the fiscal year 2020. As a follow-up request to that comes a monitoring. So they are out monitoring both our current practices, past practices. We had our entrance conference yesterday, but all of the documentation that HUD's required was required in advance. So we have been able to submit all of their requested items. I don't have the mayor's letter in front of me, but what I can say is I had to respond to each and every last one of those items, and every last one of the documents have been submitted. They've been completed, submitted to HUD, and we're now moving into the next phases of the process. One of the other things that came out was, I'm sure it's a part of this as well. So the first part of the question, we have completed every single item that HUD, that the mayor had outlined that we would do. We have met all of those deliverables. The second item was that we also had open HUD findings. So when this all began, part of when I took the seat, we had 16 findings from HUD. We were successful in closing out 11 of those findings by early March. There was a remaining 5 findings that was there for MOHS.
You said you closed out 11 of them by March of this year?
By March, yes, sir.
Of 24?
Yep.
Please continue.
So I arrived in this seat October 16th, and we had, and I remember that date because one of my staff told me when I got here today. So what that looked like for us is I walked in, the mayor, we had a request to HUD. We asked them, can you please reopen these? We paid out these dollars. Can you please consider reopening the dollars? Part of that process for us looked like, as a city, as MOHS, are we doing the things that the mayor outlined that we were going to do? So some of that looked like a lot of policies, a lot of procedures. What we've been able to do as of March, we closed out 11 of the outstanding findings, which was there for MOHS and the city from a fiscal year 2022 monitoring. So that was one of the items, but there were 5 remaining findings for us to work on. What that included was a comprehensive standards of care for both OCOC projects and ESG. As I had laid out what some of our project portfolio looks like, that's permanent supportive housing, that's rapid rehousing, that's shelters, that's outreach. But our city did not have written for the world to be able to just go on a website and see is what are the standard procedures for each of these projects? What are you requiring of your providers? So what HUD asked us to do is to compile every single project that you have. What are the policies, the procedures? And we were able to do that. But that process for us looked like going through COC governance, looked like going through different committees and working with HUD TA in order to get those standards passed. I'm grateful to say that we were able to get those standards passed on May 16th. The other item that HUD had asked us to do was a comprehensive fiscal and program compliance manual. And what that really looks like is a training guide for every single staff that comes into MOHS. What are the roles and the responsibilities of your position? But not only that, what are the trainings? What's the monitoring risk tools and assessments that we're using, not just for MOHS, but our subrecipients as well? We have been successful in getting our standards, our fiscal and compliance standards through with HUD TA, and so I'm pretty grateful to say that that is complete and finalized as of, my date might be May 23rd, that was finalized. So the main items that HUD had outlined for us that were remaining as findings, we anticipate them being closed by 6/30/2024, which is the deadline. The last item is we are currently, I spent my morning with HUD. Our interest conference was yesterday. It's a two-prong approach for them. They are taking a look now at the supporting documentation that was associated with fiscal year 2020. So their initial request was for the city to resubmit what we require of our providers when you're requesting reimbursement, because HUD grants are reimbursement grants. And so they were able to do that. But what HUD has then followed up and said is we need documentation that's at the provider level. So what we're seeing for the next month is they're going out to our subrecipients and their providers. They're taking a look at their documentation. And for us, I think what's important to lift up is that for these COC and HOPA programs, it's not just homelessness that qualifies you, it's the documentation of the disability. So part of HUD's due diligence looks like going out to the providers, looking at protected health information, which is how were you eligible for this program. So over the next course of the month, that's a part of their process of looking at the support underneath the service delivery that we've requested reimbursement. And the last layer of that for the overall monitoring of MOHS, they're taking a look at our current systems, our current programs. They're looking at our COC, their governance charter, just trying to understand exactly how does our system work. Baltimore City is a unique system. Our coordinated access system does not work in the same way that other communities' coordinated access systems work. So part of this monitoring for us, and I'll be clear with how I'm viewing this, it is our community's opportunity for both MOHS as well as our subrecipients to understand the importance of record keeping and the importance of the compliance that's underneath each of these programs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have, I'm assuming that we sent 2 letters to HUD, one a week after this and one a month after this?
I can provide you all with the corrective action responsive if it's helpful for you to be able to see it. A lot of the supporting documentation goes into our portal, and it also includes protected health information, but I can absolutely send you the responses that we sent to them, and it lays out very clearly what was MOHS corrective action responses, just so you can kind of see what's been closed out and where we're landing.
That would be very helpful. When can you get that to the committee?
I can get it to you today. If you let, I can send it to you right now, and it's an easy document to forward.
Outstanding. Thank you very much.
Of course.
Councilwoman McCray. Excellent. Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually said this in the last hearing, but I was a little off on my question list, but I do want to lift up. We referred your office, family that was being evicted. My chief of staff worked with Ms. Daniels in your shop, who was very thorough in her work and actually made sure that that person not only prevented from being evicted, but is back on track. And so just want to highlight that very thorough response from someone in your office. So just wanted to extend
Thank
a
you,
thank
sir.
you on behalf of my staff.
Thank you.
I did want to talk a little bit about the sort of same line of questioning in the last hearing around eviction prevention. How many applications are pending still? If you have that on hand, if not, we can submit it as a request. And then just the scale of need from your perspective versus the resources you have, if you could speak on that a little bit.
You speaking to my heart. So this was an ARPA initiative, and what this ARPA initiative looked at was we knew coming out of COVID there was going to be a need to put some dollars aside that was going to really be towards, the project was not designed to be eviction prevention. Let me just lift up. Eviction prevention, when you typically see an eviction prevention project, you're going to see a very quick 5-7 day turnaround. This initiative, that was not its intent. Its intent was in order for us to help clients that was dealing with arrears, that was helping clients that maybe needed some shallow subsidy, that you're coming out of COVID and you need a little bit of support that you can be able to use towards your rent for a period of time. There was other categories that was associated with it, but I want to lift up what the intent of the project was when it launched. What we've seen though, the project launched, it's about $1.2 million. We're now in early June. We've already expended $500,000 of those dollars is in United Way portal. We've received over 407 applications. And so as a result, we've had to stop accepting new project applications for this ARPA initiative because of the pace, the fastness of what we've seen in the community. So when I talk about need, the need is greater than what's been allocated for this project, and this project is also pretty complex when you're asking the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services to now go ahead and allocate eviction prevention dollars. Our team has done a really great job at trying to put together something that's a fast-moving project by any other agency, but we've received well over 400 applications. United Way has processed 140 applications so far, but again, because we have about well over 300 applications that we have received, our team is now processing those applications. The average request that we have gotten is $4,900 is the average request, right? So when you look at over 300 applications that's in the queue, the average amount of an application is $4,900. We're going to expend all of our ARPA dollars on that we've allocated for this project. And as a result, we're not accepting any new project application, but we will process those that we have in our queue.
Sorry, I'm trying to jot that down. Okay. You kind of answered my second question. I got another question, Mr. Chair, that was somewhat related, but my last question for the hearing. You want me to just get it in, or wait?
You can literally ask anything you want, Councilman. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How many outreach workers does MOHS currently have, and what challenges do you all face with the homeless population as far as like just trying to work them through connecting the services? Just kind of get a picture of like what the challenges are at the moment that you're seeing on the ground.
I feel like Councilman Romas knows all of my challenges when it comes down to this. So our outreach team includes about 8 staff, right? When you look at the numbers, the outreach teams as a whole served well over 3,800 individuals last year, right? Over 3,800 street homeless individuals were in need of services and support in 2023. What we've been able to do is through our HSP project, we have about 4 organizations that we also fund to do street outreach. So that would look like Downtown Partnership is one of the agencies that also supports the outreach work. And there are about 2 or 3 smaller organizations. But what that charge looks like for them is you are literally being asked to go out and serve people where they are, and how can I get you connected to the larger system? So the challenges within that is great. And what we're asking of them is, please go ahead and make sure people are okay, that they understand where the resources are. Can you please try to get them connected to shelter? And just to kind of lift up what the system itself looks like, connecting you to shelter does not mean I'm connecting you to a housing intervention. So that next process for a person looks like, I need to kind of get you a coordinated access packet going. I now need to track down that you have been street homeless. I need someone to verify that history in order for you to even qualify for any of our housing projects. But the second layer to that then looks like I need to be able to document that you have a disability. So I say this to say that the outreach team's charge is way greater than what eight people are going to be able to do. What I'm trying to do, what I'm doing in every single room I'm in, I'm lifting up that our access point as a city is not very strong, that we need more providers that are going to be able to navigate people. And the challenge with navigation is I'm asking you to stay connected to a transient person. So once there is a housing match, I'm reaching out to an agency that can say, well, this person came here for something to eat on Wednesday, but we have never seen them since. But there you go. Now that person is not connected to the broader system. So it's really, outreach has been seen as sitting outside of the system, because in many ways it does sit outside of the system. They're not able to connect you to the broader system because of that workflow, right? So what I think I'm hoping to do in the upcoming, I'm living my life in quarters, what I'm looking to do in the next quarter is how do we increase that connection to agencies that can be access points, but there is no funding associated with access points. This really is agencies that I'm asking, can you please just recognize that this is a part of your service? How can I help that you can connect this person that is street homeless to navigation? How can you connect them to support? But it is a tall ask that we are asking of agencies. And so the outreach teams, small, we're serving several thousands a year. So that's just to lift up what the issue is. I think that the outreach teams as a whole is doing a tremendous job in terms of trying to connect folks to housing and resources. But as a city, when we look at our system's performance measures, one of the things that we look at is what is the percentage of people that are exiting from the street into housing? Our percentage point is 13% of our people are exiting from the street into housing. That's definitely a data point that we can put some energy around and figuring out how do we solve for that. And not to say other communities are doing better than 13%. Like the average norm for that will look like a 30%. The average you can see is the transition is 30% of folks are exiting from street homelessness into housing, and we're just not there yet. But that really does look at our access points are just not strong. They're not funded. And that's just a space of that we can just continue to work towards at least understanding what some of those challenges look like.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Conway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see you, Director, and appreciate all the work you've been doing since you came in and just getting things up to speed. My first question is about homelessness prevention services, and of course those efforts are geared toward making sure that folks don't lose the house that they have, but often those resources don't come soon enough. What are we doing to address that? Do we have any strategies that we're employing or considering, or are there any considerations in this budget that'll help us meet that need more quickly?
So within this budget, the answer to that question is no. What we have funded traditionally through HSP is $300,000 towards homeless prevention dollars, but had it not been for the ARPA allocation, that service does not exist for MOHS. What that really does look like is working with DSS, who does have eviction prevention dollars, and just understanding what are the resources that are in the natural ecosystem in order to refer clients to understand those programs a little bit better. And so we've been doing a little bit of work with DSS on a different project because we've had the ARPA dollars, but our intent is to reach out and figure out how can we just increase that connection point for clients to be able to utilize their eviction prevention dollars. And DHCD also has eviction prevention dollars, but again, a lot of the programs that made MOHS's project very unique is that you have to have a source of income in a plan that's going to ensure that you do not come back into the same predicament. So oftentimes you'll hear With this allocation, we were really just focused on how do we prevent the eviction and try to connect you to additional services and support. But in other service streams or other dollars, they want to see that plan up front. And I don't think that's an unrealistic ask. I just think that this project was launched a little bit differently, so that can also lift up as to why we've seen this layer of applications coming into for the ARPA. We just didn't have those restrictions associated with it.
Yeah, I think I'm also hearing from folks in my district that we're having trouble paying landlords on time still. Have we thought about any tweaks or changes to what we're doing or how we might begin to address issues like that?
If we're referring to some of our COC housing projects and programs that are federally funded, we've actually been paying our landlords on time. I think part of what, like I had my team printed up for me of what is our compliance percentages since I've taken this position. And so overall, every month, we're 90 percentile of paying our, but what factors into that is our subrecipients have to submit their documentation on time. So if subrecipients don't submit their documentation on time, then MOHS will not be able to pay the subrecipient on time. But in terms of our process and systems, I came in, I explained that this was going to be an area of focus for us. So we've been consistent with that. One of the things I'll also mention is with HUD, and that's the largest one that we receive a lot of, that you all receive a lot of calls on, is the HUD COC projects. What I appreciate about this city in this season was, well, a lot of things, not to say like that. What I appreciate was we were looking at some unique ways that we can just still continue to pay landlords besides the fact that we don't have a GIW from HUD. What a grant inventory worksheet looks like in previous years of MOHS, you really do need that contract in order to come into BOE, in order to start spending on contracts. What we've been able to do because of the implementation of Workday, and just some of the work that I've been able to do with the Department of Finance and CAO Leach, was let's look at if we have a grant award notice from HUD and we have the allocations from these providers, can we continue to pay them? And we've been able to do that. That's very different from what we had in previous years. So that's a different item for our system. So what I'll say is, if our providers are submitting their stuff on time, then we are able to pay our subrecipients on time. We're still doing some work with providers on their supporting documentation, but that kind of helps us to understand this HUD monitoring, right? With this HUD monitoring, support documentation is the driver of these reimbursements. If you cannot submit your documentation, then MOHS should not be remitting the payments. So oftentimes when we're getting those calls, I'm grateful that you all have been receptive when I'm saying that that subrecipient has not submitted their invoices, but oftentimes we cannot allow them to submit documentation that does not meet the eligibility requirement of what our funder is asking us to do. That can be a tension point in our system that unfortunately the clients have that receive that impact. But at the same time, if we compromise what we need, then we're going to compromise the entire fund.
Yeah, this is what I'm hearing is there are strings on the federal side and coming through us then to pay the folks, to keep folks in their home. It's tough because at the end of the day, folks are threatened with eviction because of that slowdown in the money. And that's unacceptable. We got to figure out some way to make sure that we don't have people in those precarious situations. So I encourage you, if there are things that we should be thinking about or any additional support that we should be considering, of course, in light of the budget process, more than happy to have that conversation. But where we are right now, I think is we still got some work to do, and I want to figure out how we work through that red tape. I know federal funding is notoriously complex and has a lot of paperwork and red tape and otherwise. But I'm curious what we can figure out based on your understanding of the problem now, because if folks are evicted, it's much more expensive for us to find housing for someone after they've been kicked out of their house than it is to, upend that, resolve that issue on the front end. So, not sure what the answer is here, but
No, I appreciate that. One of the things I'll share also is that when we look at our COC program, we've been really focused on letting it be community-based providers. That means that some of these agencies are smaller, some of them are larger, but when we look at the smaller organizations, these are all reimbursable grants. But when they're applying, you really are contracting to be reimbursed. So as such, you're responsible for still paying this rent up front and understanding that when you submit your invoices, you are reimbursed for the service. What we're recognizing is some of our subrecipients have very many grants and unfortunately does not have the cash flow. But from a HUD lens, HUD is not concerned if you have the cash flow, because technically if you don't have the cash flow to be reimbursed, the city has stepped in over the years and have put these dollars up front. But the danger of putting the dollars up front is when we're in a position of you need to get the dollars back, right? So I think that part of this looks like is doing some work with subrecipients, helping them to understand their portfolio, and can you manage this portfolio at this level? That's hard for subrecipients to be able to say. Some of them have had these COC programs for a very long time and they want to keep their COC programs. And so I think what we're going to be doing in the upcoming quarters is just having some really wonderful conversations with them about how do we help them to process. Some of our subrecipients are also struggling with staffing and finance and all of those wonderful things that you have to submit the support for. All of these things result in delays in process that unfortunately our clients are feeling that impact. But I don't think that, I think it's larger than just MOHS. This is some issues that are at the subrecipient level. What we know is there's going to be a grant that's going to be up front, a reimbursable grant. And so we just have to figure out within our system and within our community-based providers, how do we diversify that? How do we keep it fair so that it can stay with some of these providers, recognizing some of their budgets is that of what their grant awards are. It's complex. And also HUD has a 25% match requirement for these projects. So all of these things are complexities that are at the provider level. And I do think that we are focused on just working in partnership with our providers to solve for them. But I definitely appreciate that. I think over the last 6 months, a lot of you have taken the time to talk with me about what does this process look like and what are some of the challenges that both MOHS and our providers are experiencing. So I absolutely appreciate you all taking the time to just understand those projects. So thank you.
Yeah. My second question is regarding outreach to homelessness, or for the homeless. There is a recommended increase of $750,000, or a 73% increase in the federal, state, and special grants appropriations. In fiscal 2025, in the budget, the service assumes receiving $1.7 million in revenue from various grants, yet we still are having trouble, of course, with homelessness. I'm curious what we're doing to make sure that our services are targeting the right individuals at the right time so that we can deploy our limited resources as effectively as possible.
So it's a two-pronged approach that we're taking with our outreach teams. We've been able to identify the encampment sites, and people are able to utilize the 311 line for us to be able to call in and let us know when they see someone experiencing homelessness. Our outreach teams, all of them have different targeted zones that they go into every single day and do their concentrated outreach. But in addition to that, we've now added on navigators onto our outreach team. So what you're really looking at is how are we increasing the service delivery of the outreach team? So it's not just about outreach, it's about how do we connect them to housing opportunities. So that's really what that increase is associated with. But the larger issue is always going to be there are more people than what we have resources to serve. And a lot of that looks like helping them to understand what else is around you. And we're also doing some work at involving more community-based providers that we don't necessarily fund, but we know that you're passionate about this space as well. And so helping people to understand who those agencies are as well. So I think that this is, when we look at those that are experiencing street homelessness, this is going to be a community-wide effort. It's not just going to be MOHS. It's going to look like different providers and different people and different churches stepping up in order to increase service delivery across the board.
What are the zones that we use, and are those publicly available?
So each of the different outreach teams, they're paired in terms of two, and so some of the funded providers also have communities that are their zone. So I can get our team and we can be able to break it down for you so you can kind of see who's charged to what zone.
Yeah, that'd be helpful. And then what kind of data do we use to inform where those resources go? I'm not sure. Well, I'll just leave it there. What kind of data do we use to inform where we target our resources and outreach?
So the outreach team, outside of, we'll put the encampment acuity stuff to the side, but those encampments still exist. So a part of their outreach first is those that we know that people are residing at. That's a part of their everyday outreach strategy of those that we know that there are people already residing at those sites. We go, we check in, we see what resources they need. That's the top level of what they're charged with every day. And then the second layer looks like we receive calls from 311, and we receive calls from different constituents for different people that are experiencing homelessness, and then we also deploy them to those sites as well. So that's what a daily outreach looks like. It looks like going to the known sites that we know that people are already living in, and then it looks like responding to those extra calls that we're receiving just to go out to folks that are experiencing homelessness and providing resources and support.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We've also been joined by Councilman Isaac Yitzi Schleifer, 5th District member of the committee. Schleifer, then Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How you doing, Director? Does your agency apply for like external grants from like foundations and other organizations?
We do not.
Is there a reason why, or?
So historically, MOHS would have received, we get a ton of support from the philanthropic space, but it's more through the lens of supporting our providers. So as instance, with the Housing Accelerator Program, we were able to kind of leverage and use the philanthropic space so that we're all in alignment on what the project is and what other agencies need support. So historically, what we've used that space for is more about the initiatives and the strategic approaches with the different organizations. So MOHS, we typically have not taken direct dollars in recent years from the philanthropic space. However, they support our providers. And so they are a part of our resource allocation committee. They are part of our leadership committee on ending homelessness. They are part of our COC board. So we integrate them in our work, and then they're also connected to the providers directly, so they can give them those funds directly.
Gotcha, because a lot of the agencies do receive from various foundations, and I know there is money available for this space. So I'm a little surprised here that we don't pursue that. But even from like internal funds and programs, like the Children and Youth Fund, for instance, we know that unfortunately, there's many homeless children in the city of Baltimore, and so do you guys tap into the Children and Youth Fund to get funding to assist those children and programming for those children? Yeah,
that's a great question. I'll preface it with MOHS is not a direct service provider. So oftentimes the grants that most grants want to fund, especially the philanthropic space, they're looking at, I want to connect directly to those that are through the service. MOHS more acts as one of the funders. So we're more of a pass-through. So that's really why our work is centered around making sure we're connecting the philanthropic space with the agencies. They're very much a part of the work, but we're not a direct service provider. So that's also what takes a lot of those opportunities away, because we just don't provide the services directly. What I am looking at is we do provide outreach services directly and looking for ways to involve the philanthropic space in that. But again, one of the challenges that we continue to see is we're highly invested in the creation of permanent housing, and we've gotten a ton of support across the board from every community on those projects. When it's about outreach services, it's a little bit different because you're asking someone to invest in something that they can't quite see. You can't quite see the outcomes, you can't quite see, and you feel like it's shelter. So I've encountered definitely the support of wanting to understand how to help MOHS. They sit on a lot of committees. I sit on their committees as well. But it's really about finding that synergy of what is the right project to bring them in on and at the right timing. But again, with MOHS not being a direct service provider, it makes it important for us to identify what is our strategic priorities, and they do a phenomenal job at connecting with the agencies to implement those projects.
Gotcha. So if you guys aren't the direct service provider, do you view your role as more like your agency as like a convener of all of these services?
I agree with that. I'm going to use that word. We are not a direct service provider outside of the outreach. Our role in this space is more of a facilitator of these projects. And so we are the direct grantee, but we use sub-recipients for all of our services. So I appreciate that language because it is a very clear distinction in how MOHS functions. The only service that we actually directly provide is that of the outreach. Everything else is through partners.
Gotcha. So what would you view as like the biggest challenge in this space? Because I can tell you from the outside looking in, it seems pretty chaotic. So you see like there's a bunch of different functions that happen, whether it's clothing availability, food availability, shower program, whatever it may be, and they kind of all seem to be acting independently with little to no coordination whatsoever. So what could we do with your agency to try to streamline that and bring that together? Because what I've seen just in my 8 years here is programs start up, they ramp up, and then they close down. And so there's really just, that really is lacking that continuation of services and the consistency of services.
So, tricky question, but great one at the same time. It is a little bit chaotic because a lot of the work is being driven by funding streams. So if you look at our access points in the city, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, for us, what an access point looks like is if I'm hungry, can I go to your place in order to get something to eat? What that looks like for a person that needs to be navigated is, yeah, you can eat here, but you can't get navigated here. We don't do navigation services. You need to go over to this other agency that does navigation. You go over to the other agency that does navigation. I do it on Tuesday, I don't do it on Wednesday. And our clients are experiencing that chaos that you're speaking of. Part of what that chaos is because is we don't fund access points. We fund service providers to do a particular item. So if you are an agency, and I've run agencies, right? What you do is you look at what you can afford to do. You look at what you're funded to do. You look at what you have the documentation to prove that you've done. What we haven't as a group collectively looked at is what is it going to take one agency that has a particular service. How can I add navigation to your agency and not make it a burdensome project, which it is quite time consuming that we're asking agencies to do. So part of that looks like if you're a street outreach agency, some of our street outreach providers have very targeted services, but navigation is a different component. So some of that chaos begins because of funding. Your funding kind of limits what you're going to be able to provide. And I think as we move forward, I think CAO Leach, I might be driving her crazy by talking about my access points, but what's important for us to know as a community, each agency has its own mission statement, it has its own priorities, it has its own service delivery, and what we're asking them to do is, I'm saying to you, can you please be a navigator? I can't pay you to be a navigator because it's not a funded item, but it's really important to our system. I don't understand why we've left something that's so important to chance, which is what we've done as a community. We've left it to chance. So I think in the upcoming months, I'm more than happy to continue to talk about different ways that we can look at the current agencies that are navigating sites, but how do we increase their capacity? It's not that they don't want to be navigating sites, but to their point, you're asking me to do case management, and you're not giving me the resources and support to do the case management. And that has been very difficult for the agency and for our city to solve for.
Right, I can just, and I appreciate that. I feel from viewing this, again, from the outside, that it seems like it's more of a logistical issue here than a capacity one. There's a lot of people who want to do a lot of, good work in the city, but when I speak to somebody who's experiencing homelessness, the first thing you hear is, I don't know where to go, I don't know where to turn. And of course, there's different shelters and there's programs, but like you're saying, there's no, there's not that hub where you can really just get everything answered. And so I just kind of think that we should look at that and find a way that we have hubs, whether it's set up in a zone, in 4 different zones in the city, whatever it may be, that all of these providers, any provider that we do anything to support, that there be some type of, requirement that they operate under, this one roof, under this one umbrella. Because what I also see, and I look up a lot of these organizations, 990s, is that there's a lot of duplication of specific positions and functions. And so a lot of that money and resources is going to overhead as opposed to going to the actual specific stuff that these folks need. And I just feel like that's where we would be really successful if we provided that support by providing the resources, by providing that hub. And so we hear about business incubators all the time where you have that building, that office space set up, and you're taking a lot of the functions that folks and entrepreneurs are not comfortable with, are not familiar with, and putting it all in one place so that they can all do it together. I feel like anybody who's a registered service provider that the city is involved with and that they're asking the city for support, what we need to be asking them for in return is that they have a presence in one centralized hub. And I think that would be it's a lot easier to bring these folks to a specific place than it is to, like you're saying, the case management is almost impossible in this space. And so because the diverse needs and challenges, and so I'll just leave it with that. But that's what I'm thinking. I really think we have a logistics issue here.
Yeah, I think that it's logistic capacity and funding. So a lot of the agencies that MOHS funds, it's not through general funds, right? It's not through our funding sources. So as such, they have to comply with the funding sources at which they have given. So as an example, 29 million is from a COC project. My COC funded housing programs cannot do this service that we're talking about. I cannot make this a requirement of them. And the same thing for our HSP providers. So I think part of it is really understanding how these organizations are funded, and then I can push back at what your capacity is. So from the city's lens, we fund emergency shelters, and that's really what our general fund allocation is for. Those agencies are absolutely required to navigate. It's a part of their project, it's a part of what we pay them for. But those that are experiencing street homelessness are not in these shelters. They're not accessing the agencies that we fund. So it's a little bit more complex than that, right? It's a little bit more complex than logistics. I think it turns into, there's a space for us to talk to other organizations about their funding streams and what are some of their limitations and what can we do to increase your capacity to be able to add this service on in a way that's going to be effective. Because we've had organizations, when we first started with coordinated access, lots of organizations was kind and gracious enough to say, yes, we want to provide that service. But what they came to find out was that this is really, really burdensome on my organization. This is taking my staff away in a way that I did not anticipate. This is me having to make sure someone goes to a healthcare provider that has a verification of disability, that's connected to income, that has the documentation. So those items turns into capacity challenges for the organization. But I definitely appreciate how you feel we should approach it, and I agree. If we're funding you, I can make this a part of your contract, but a part of that is recognizing that we're not funding these agencies, that they're coming from other funding sources that if they attempted to be a navigating agency, I'll be right back in here for doing something that was ineligible.
Right, and I appreciate that, and one thing about the funding piece, there's no shortage of money in Baltimore and Maryland. There's plenty of money, there's plenty of foundations. We're like the charity hub of the state, and so that's one of the big advantages in Baltimore, is that we have all of these resources, we have these organizations. What I see and what I hear from people in the philanthropic community, what I see how their behaviors work, is they tend to want to throw fuel on something where they're going to get a huge return on investment. And so they want to see their dollars go far. So a foundation that is looking to spend $1 million on improving the city, improving the world, isn't going to want to give that money to give $100,000 to 10 different organizations for them to pay their director, $80,000 each, and then the other 20,000, 20% of it actually goes towards the cause, and sometimes even less. And so I feel like having an incubator like that would draw attention to an industry where a lot of folks in the philanthropic community do not support, but would be more than interested and willing to, because when you hear, like, I know I've had different organizations, solicit for donations, and one of the first things like they talk about is, oh, we're gonna provide this much food, and we're gonna provide this. And when you go down to some of these, these food distributions, or you go down to some of these program distributions, you see a lot of waste. You see a lot that goes unhanded out, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. And so if we were to be that streamliner and convener and show the philanthropic community that, hey, the city is really taking charge over this, and when you contribute to this umbrella and when you support this function, what you're doing is you're throwing fuel onto all of the resources that this organization needs. You're not actually going and just putting that money towards somebody's salary. It's actually going to the people. I think that you'll find is that there's a lot of money out there that people would be very willing to support this important cause.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director Simmons. I do want to just pause and thank you for coming into the city at a really challenged time for your agency. It is no great secret that MOHS was in trouble, and that we had significant bureaucratic and capacity and organizational challenges going on within the agency. And I just want to thank you for stepping into, I'm sure, incredibly thankless role, and being there to work with us and work with our neighbors experiencing homelessness and our communities, and clean up some mess that you did not create. So
Thank you.
yeah, just want to start there, because I think, we got to thank public servants who step up in these roles, particularly when they come in like you did amidst some chaos. So thank you. I want to ask about the MOHS outreach team, and I do want to just shout out Jesse Stevens, who is phenomenal and does exceptionally good work. Homelessness does not stop at night, yet I believe the outreach team does. I assume that has to do with funding and capacity constraints and all the rest, but I think it is a concern because often that is where we see, whether it's parent and children, whether it's just any individuals that are in need of shelter, that are in need of that outreach, that are in need of, you mentioned navigation several times, that often is where violence happens. We know from our homeless population. So can you explain why they don't operate at night and what it would take to get that team to be able to operate 24 hours, 7 days a week?
It would take about a $5 million allocation in order to get the emergency services, the outreach team to work 24/7. We'd probably look at a request of between $5 and $7 million, because we would essentially be asking to add on 3 teams from this budget, you'll see the cost is about $2 million for the team that we have with the shifts that we have. So if we were looking at making that a 24/7 operation, the first item we'll look at is what's the cost and where is those costs and dollars are going to come from. I think everything else we can take a look at, but that's the first barrier that we would really need to look at. And then the second one would look at what's our outreach team providing at 11 to 7 that the police department is not providing between 11 and 7, because I would not be able to offer you a shelter option, right? So it would look like for our community to understand between 11 and 7, what are we hoping that the outreach team is going to be able to accomplish, and what would some of those service delivery look like? Because we would be adding another element into that work. Between 8 to 4, you're really looking at who else is open, what are the service connections, where can I get you from point A to point B? So if we're looking at expanding what that scope will look like, we'd have to take a look at what are we hoping for them to accomplish also at those points of time as well. I'm open to the discussion. I don't know if a 24/7 outreach team would be effective, because I'm not sure what we would accomplish by them having midnight, overnight hours, but I'm definitely open to the discussion.
I just know that we've had several instances where in our office, folks will reach out at night, or someone that'll have my cell phone or that will tag me on social media, and whether it's the person experiencing homelessness themselves or whether it's neighbors and community members, it is often a time where folks are panicked, concerned, afraid, and given some of the constraints on beds and the hotels and all the rest, I just think having a point of contact, having someone that can connect during those hours, I think would be extremely helpful. I know it's not going to happen during this budget cycle, but I just want to put that on the public radar. I think it's really important. My next question, I wanted to ask about our encampment policy. I think that Baltimore is fortunate in that our population experiencing homelessness is somewhere around, I think your slide, 3,400 is about right. Obviously, that's a moving target, and a lot of folks are on the margins and can drift in and out. But we are not some of the West Coast cities that are just experiencing a tremendous amount of homelessness, or even Washington, D.C. right down the road, or any of the cities that are just overwhelmed. Systems are overwhelmed. I think in Baltimore, we have some great nonprofit providers like Healthcare for the Homeless. We have some great folks in this space. But I am curious about our encampment policy. It seems like, I know this is something that you have been working on and trying to solidify. I think there is some public confusion. Is it legal to camp in a park? Is it not legal? And would just love to hear your explanation of our current policy, and then sort of the matrix that you've been developing in order to assess whether to clear an encampment.
Perfect. So the protocol really does call for us to have a shelter option for someone before we clear a space. That's the main driver of the process. And what we've seen, so we haven't done a resolution since the Wymondale resolution. And the reason for that is because before you do a resolution, we do intensive outreach in case management and navigation and support. That includes a very comprehensive, detailed process for each individual at the site. And so what I think was the initial thought when people heard an encampment resolution, that they thought that we were just going to move people and not care about the people. I think that was the first misunderstanding about the protocol as a whole. And I think what ended up happening was people were able to understand this is really about a housing intervention, and how can I put targeted resources towards a selected encampment site. So as a result, what we do in that, do the encampment resolution. So to answer the first part of the question is we don't do a resolution unless we have a space that we can absolutely send you into. And once we put you in that space, then we're looking at getting a coordinated access packet. We're looking at a housing assessment and trying to get as many housing resources as we can to that individual. So it's really about targeted case management and services. What people didn't understand was the city was not going to be looking to do a resolution on every single encampment in Baltimore City. So the odd part of the situation was we started getting calls of people asking, well, when are you gonna do a resolution on this site? We're not gonna do a resolution on that site. It's called an acuity scale, and it's about health and risk safety of that particular area, of that particular encampment site, and that's how we prioritize the space. But aside from that, our commitment has been to make sure that those that we do a resolution have a safe place to go. So with Wyman as an example, we've had to work very intensely with those clients in order to get them navigated, in order to get them to healthcare and all of those other things that you normally don't see as a part of an outreach approach. We've extended the outreach approach to the encampment protocol. And so one of the things I'll use as a comparison is typically with outreach, regular outreach services of us going out every day, 25% or less of the people are going to say yes to shelter, yes to services, yes to support. With the encampment protocol, over 60% of the folks have said yes to shelter. At the time of the resolution, pretty much everyone has said, yes, we want shelter, yes, we want support. But what we were looking at is how long do you stay? Because it's not about if you accepted shelter because you knew we were gonna do the resolution. What makes this worth it for us is, are you gonna be able to stay in a hotel? Are we gonna be able to navigate you? What we've seen is 69% of the people that have gone through the encampment resolution has been navigated, and that's a really big deal for us because our street outreach, those that are experiencing street homelessness, they are not navigated. Less than 19% of them are actually navigated, which means you're not receiving any form of housing intervention through anything. So what I like to think about with the encampment protocol and with the outreach work, this is about how can we complete a resolution that for a site that has been deemed as unsafe, uninhabitable for the people that are living there, for the community. But how do we take that site, take those individuals, and pour a lot of time, resources, and energy into getting them into the system the right way, which is what we've been able to do so far.
I absolutely appreciate the complexity of this question. And you know, we're dealing with human beings, and we as a city are committed to being trauma-informed in our practices, and I appreciate the housing first approach. I think my ask would be that we have clearly developed and clearly communicated protocols, because I think that in the past it's been haphazard and unclear, and it's left the public really frustrated because we don't really know, and so the public doesn't really know. And there was one resolution over in my district at Hollibird, over at Hollibird and Graceland Park, Hollibird and Dundalk Streets, and I think this was before your time, but it was just extremely messy, and it was unclear what BPD was supposed to do. It was unclear what MOHS was supposed to do. Like, it just, it didn't go well. I mean, eventually it did, you know, it was resolved, but it just, I think did not feel good to the neighbors, to the people themselves, to any of our agencies. And so my ask for you is that we, I know this is a work in progress, but that we develop a clear set of protocols, a matrix, acuity scale, as you mentioned, and that there is some public communication of what that looks like, just so that the public has some clear expectations and folks aren't just like, when is it gonna happen? When is it gonna happen? That's one. And then two, internally, within city government that all of the agencies are clear on what their role is when a resolution occurs and who goes first, who is in operational command. It just has felt, best word I can think of is haphazard to this point, and I think we would be much better served as a city if we were able to clarify this process.
Love the question. So part of the encampment protocol, it spells out everything that you just named. This is done with an encampment work group that includes the city agencies as well as the outreach providers for the city. That team meets on a weekly basis. So they meet regardless of if we're going to do a resolution. They talk about what are they seeing in the streets, what are some of the needs, what are some sites that are becoming increasingly concerning about. But when we're doing a resolution, that work group has a work plan that's associated with it. And so everyone knows exactly what they're supposed to do. One of the things that we've listed just from a process lens is we know far in advance when we're going to do the site, but from a posting standpoint, we posted 30 days in advance. But what we also learned from Wyman, we ended up having lots of community meetings. And so what we said we were going to do now with the next ones, when we get to them, is we're going to do those meetings in advance. So as a work group, we know far in advance, 60, 90 days out, of what sites are we increasingly concerned about. It's laid out what's MOHS's role, what's DPW's role. So all of that stuff, even in terms of storage, we're very clear with the clients of what the expectations are. We've created a consent form so that they can also understand what the process is. Just another thing to lift up in that process of when we give the notice, we are attempting to make sure that we can connect people to shelter before the resolution. And what that looks like is once a person says to us, I want shelter, I just don't want it today, we're just holding that space for them. We've earmarked it for them, we're not going to take it, but once the resolution comes, then we release the space. But that becomes part of what this process looks like. We let the clients know what storage we can provide. And so what we've done for both the MOHS side, for the city side, we've made this clearly posted on our website of every single step that we're taking, what our role is, what are we looking to do. We've created a consent form for clients. Some of that also was lessons learned too. Like some of that was definitely lessons learned. So as an item, as a follow-up, with Wyman, we held community meetings, but they were after the fact or during. Like it was before the resolution. What I feel like what my team's feedback was, and we've met with the LEAC and we've met with YAB, a lot of their feedback included, can you all do these community meetings in advance of the notice being posted? I absolutely agree. We can do that and we'll incorporate that into our practices. But the other items that you've lifted up, we've done our best to make sure it's clear in the protocol of who's responsible for what and what the expectations can look like.
I appreciate that. I would further ask, though, that that be communicated out to the public so that there is an understanding, because I think what happens, at least for me and I venture to say for some of my colleagues, is we'll go to a community association meeting, everybody's hot, and it's, when is this encampment being taken care of? Why aren't you doing anything? I think when there is a gap in understanding, it creates frustration. And so if the mayor's office can more actively communicate the protocols, I think it will be extremely helpful to all of us. And again, I just want to once again say I appreciate you taking on this very challenging task, and thank you for your service, and thanks for the work you're doing.
Thank you, sir. Councilwoman Porter. Hello.
Thank you, ma'am. Director, I just want to echo what my colleagues have said. I definitely think that you have done such an amazing job thus far cleaning up the mess that has been MOHS. One of the things that I'm really concerned about, and this is a constituent concern that's been raised repeatedly over the past year or so, about the public places strategy that you all have within MOHS. We are noticing that there are public parks abutting or near residential homes, and it's not really a clear understanding of how they can be moved from those public places because they're literally abutting a person's back door, or they're in the alley, or they are taking up spaces in vacant homes that are near homes that, that are occupied. And we simply can't go on in that manner. What is the direction or the strategy from your office to rectify or have some resolution? Because we are hearing it from our constituents, and I understand you all have a place making. I keep saying place making, but a place strategy. But something's not working and something's not connecting because residents are still seeing urination, defecation, just all of those sanitation and hazardous issues existing right by their door or right in their alley.
After you give me a compliment, I'm so sorry to have to say this. That's not our initiative. So I think that is a DHCD initiative. And so some of what we've been seeing is squatters and folks that are occupying spaces that are not within our outreach purview. And so what we are looking to do is do a little bit more work with the DHCD team as they're trying to deal with some of these vacants and some of these squatters. But that is, we support their work, and we're not the drivers of that strategy.
So I would respectfully disagree with that. Given that the individuals are experiencing homelessness, the expectation and the charge from the mission is that you all take that under consideration, and that is the mission of your organization, is to account for, provide for persons experiencing homelessness. And my further question would be, the development of the public place strategy came out of your office. This was the public strategy that I believe the CA worked on. It was a nine-month plan that my office provided input on from the Berry Circle community. So I know this strategy, I know this strategy very, very well because we provided that input from a council's perspective in order to provide those matrices that Councilman Cohen is talking about. Who is the responsible agency? What are agencies supposed to be doing? Who is the responsible one? And what are the outcomes for that particular agency? And I'm a little bit concerned that just the response is that this is DHCD when the mission of your organization, I wonder if we can.
Homelessness, very in brief.
Yeah, the overall mission of your organization is explicitly these people that we're talking about.
So we've had two different issues. So for the public place strategy, please
Public place
forgive me.
strategy, yes.
Public place strategy, I am not familiar with that. So I'm gonna have to circle back to Jesse and my team to see what's our involvement and how I can help. That's not something that I've been a part of. But what we have seen is a lot of calls that has to do with squatters and people that are in vacant properties. What we've been able to do is go out and offer services. But unfortunately, if they decline the services, there really is nothing that our team can do if you are occupying a vacant or you are a squatter. So what we've been able to do from our team's perspective is we go out. When it's identified, we attempt to get them to leave the space. We attempt to offer them all of the resources and support, but that really is the extent of what we can offer when someone is a squatter or when someone is occupying a space that they really should not be in.
So I hear you when you say that. So what are we to tell our constituents when they come to us and ask us to resolve these situations that like they're existing right within like their homes, their backyards, public places that families are supposed to be going to? How do we respond to that? Because clearly right now we don't have a plan. Or we don't have an approach?
I think that's a fair question. And so what I am gonna do is say, let me get back to you and I will send you a meeting invite within the next couple of days. Let me do my research and due diligence, and then I'll reach out to you directly and we can connect. because it's something that I have not been a part of or connected to. Not to say that I'm removing myself from it, but let me get myself a little bit more information, and then I'll circle back.
Sure. And the second question is for the CA. I know this place, what is it?
It is public
Places strategy that we had worked on. It just doesn't seem to be working when we have individuals experiencing homelessness that are in public places that are literally abutting a person's back door, backyard, alleyway. How do we, what is the plan? How do we respond to that?
Yep, so thank you for that question. So I'm sure Director Simmons has talked a bit about the encampment resolution protocol. And so through that protocol, we now have a tool by which we prioritize encampments or individuals experiencing homelessness and how we respond. So if they are on private property, then obviously that's going to be a higher prioritization. We would coordinate with BPD as needed to be able to respond to those individuals who are on private property. I think a thing that we want to be very thoughtful about, right now there's a movement to criminalize homelessness in this country. We're not going to be a part of that. And so what we have to do and what we will continue to do is the work that Director Simmons has been leading, and we are going to lead with outreach first. We're going to be a housing first city, and we're going to try to identify shelter spaces as well as permanent housing solutions for those individuals experiencing homelessness. But again, it is her encampment protocol, her encampment resolution protocol that she manages, and that her outreach team also is a part of implementing. That is our strategy. That is how we prioritize what our response will be, the level of response that we see. And again, she's doing that work every single day.
So I appreciate that, but one of the things that I'm concerned about is the public, how can I put it?
Strategy, it's
How can families go visit our public spaces in the meantime while we're figuring out or while we're engaging these individuals into shelters, into services? Because if they declined, then that outreach has to be repeated over again, and thereby we are getting complaints from our constituents. We are seeing it happen more and more where the outreach is happening over and over and over again, but there doesn't seem to be any type of resolution or the intermediate to long-term transition to shelter.
Yep. So no, again, appreciate that. This isn't an issue that's unique to the city of Baltimore, right? It's not. We can see that, and I'm sure when any of us travel, when I go to Union Station in Washington D.C. or Florida or any other place, this is an issue that communities across the country are grappling with. Again, I want to be very clear that we are outreach first, right? We are not going to be criminalizing homelessness and having BPD enforce on those individuals who are experiencing homelessness. Now, again, if you're having someone that's experiencing homelessness that might be in a park, or if they're on a sidewalk, that's a part of our encampment resolution protocol. And so we would send MOHS, they would go first. BPD, as a part of the consent decree, they have protocols on how they engage with individuals experiencing homelessness as well. They will generally want MOHS to respond or do a co-response with MOHS, where MOHS attempts to do outreach first, and then BPD will communicate that you can't be in this area because it's a public space or it's a private space or what have you. But again, I think her protocol clearly outlines and has various levels of when we need to intervene and when there needs to be engagement. So if there's someone that's experiencing homelessness in a park, we worked closely with Councilwoman Ramos's office. We responded, right? And as you saw, even with that response, there are community members who may or may not support us doing a resolution. So while I understand the input and the feedback that the council members get, we get it on both sides, right? The advocates who don't want encampment resolution, as well as folks who do want resolution. Generally, when we do a resolution, we're trying to tie that resolution to housing or to shelter, right? We never want to do a resolution without having a place to send folks. And so Director Simmons and her team work diligently to make sure that there's shelter available and that we are respecting people's rights, that we're protecting their items. Whenever we do a resolution, oftentimes you have people with IDs and it's so difficult to get some of their primary documents, and we want to be very thoughtful because these are human beings. And so again, Director Simmons and her team, I think the encampment resolution protocol, we've briefed the council on it before, happy to come back again to spend some more time to talk about the various levels that are in that protocol.
So I appreciate that response. What I'm saying is that I don't know if it's working.
So
And I'm sorry, can I just finish this one? So I don't know if it's working, and it really puts us in a very difficult position because while we're not wanting to criminalize homelessness, that's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that if there are issues that are existing with these shelters, such as public safety, such as housing these persons' items, such as making sure that, families stay together, let's identify what those issues are so that we can get more people connected to those services for shelter. They're not going into shelter for a reason, and they are staying in these public places for a reason. And so I just want us to I know this is not germane to the city of Baltimore. What I want us to do, because I feel as though we have the best and brightest in Director Simmons, I want us to dig deeper. I want us to dig deeper and see how we can make this actually work. Because if us keep going, the outreach team, we email Jesse 10 times a week, So I want to make sure that we are utilizing our limited staff of outreach services. We're balancing the work hours and operations, but we're also continuing to maintain the dignity and humanity of these people.
So one of the things I'll lift up also, let me make this distinction, so I apologize. I didn't even recognize we was talking about the encampment protocol when we said public spaces, so I apologize for that. With the vacants, and that's what my head heard first, is vacants and squatters, so I apologize. But second to that, our standardized outreach teams does look like, if we're seeing someone in the park, I'll use an example. If there was someone at one of the parks and they were very concerned, of course, kids want to play at the park. What our outreach team was able to do was we did the outreach. That's regular outreach for us. That doesn't have anything to do with an encampment site. That has to do with what's our approach. And so what that team was able to do, and what we continue to do, especially for the parks, the weather is nice. We want to do our best to make sure that the beautiful kids can use the parks. What we've been able to do is we're using our interim shelter space far more flexibly. So some of that can look like, before couples would say, well, we're staying in this park because we don't want to be apart. We've accommodated that. We're now allowing couples into our spaces. Another thing that we've heard is we're staying in this park because of, I don't want to lose my pet. Okay, let's get the documentation on your pet. You can take your pets. So as we've been seeing those as reasons for why someone is declining, we're now addressing what the reasons are. So just to lift up what our response looks like with BCRP, when they're concerned about someone, they're also a part of the encampment resolution work group. So when they're concerned about something that's happening in the public parks, they're bringing it straight into the work group, and then they're dealing with that. It doesn't even have to come into my level because they coordinate once a week to deal with it. I hope that answers your question, just in terms of what are we doing as a city? We're using our shelter spaces far more flexibly, and we're listening to, I would go into shelter if, and we're trying to solve for those if reasons.
Sure. So thank you for that. I'll stop there. My next question has to deal with just some of the landmines that you've had to experience as director. I just want everyone to have a full understanding and full account of your skeleton operations and what you are under and how you've progressed so far.
I don't even know how to answer that, if I'm being honest. I would say the challenges of the city is that of what we're seeing across the U.S. We're all trying to figure out, how do you address a housing crisis while we're also seeing drastic increases of elderly folks coming into a system that they've never had to come into before. So part of what this has looked like for me, it has looked like dealing with a lot of different directors across the city enterprise that have been partners with me. So I think that's been a gift. I had shared that in a meeting I had yesterday. I've been able to call on HABC and being able to do some work, and we're adding on new housing opportunities for people, being able to call on Director Shamaya and being able to, that's been a blessing. What those skeletons have looked like, of course, is there's policy and compliance underneath everything. And sometimes that energy is, well, how can I get this done today? And what I've been cautious about is helping people understand why that can't happen today, or what does that look like for us. I think that as a city, I can almost imagine what the pressures was of the person that sat in this seat before me, because you're asked to do a lot of different things at the exact same time. My team is definitely a skeleton screen. We're a small group, but I also take ownership of that a little bit. I've been extremely particular about the staffing that I'm going to select. And so we've had lots of candidates that has applied, but I'm looking for a very particular skill set. So as such, I've borrowed other director staff. Elizabeth is in the room. I have borrowed her on a constant basis. But that has been the energy across the city for me. What I've experienced is support from the mayor, support from CA. We brainstorm all the time. I think part of what's been a blessing is that I'm able to say what it is that my gap and my deficits are, and I'm not hearing, well, we gotta figure out a way around it. That's not what I'm hearing. I'm working with the Department of Finance of, let's look at my shelter budget, what are our needs, and we're having those real deep conversations to solve for them. So that's been a wonderful experience to have. But I think MOHS as a whole, we are an agency that's driven by federal compliance. And some of that energy can look like making people really upset. Like we're not moving as fast as we want to move. We're not paying as fast as you might want us to be paying. But underneath that, if I move too quickly, then I'm going to be jeopardizing a greater project. So that's been very interesting for me to navigate.
And I would just conclude, Mr. Chair, that Director, I think you are the right person for this position. I have full faith in you. I think that using us as a counterpart and as a co-collaborator, because not only does your staff know the districts or the city, we also know the districts in the city as well, and we can provide that insight and input into how can we make it just better all across the board, addressing homelessness, addressing transient housing, addressing public safety in our shelter space with our public safety partners such as the sheriff and the state's attorney's office. Like, use us, because we need to figure that out sooner rather than later as we transition into a post-COVID society, and we are really looking at how housing is going to be so important for so many people that we really don't have a grasp or an answer on for the vast majority of them. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I appreciate that. What I lift up for this group also is, as you're thinking about just some of your own networks and your own portfolio, part of what people are experiencing is having a difficult time using the vouchers that they've been given, right? So that can look like a lot of our programs are their subsidized housing vouchers. And so sometimes they're experiencing holding on to a voucher much longer, or holding on to a subsidy and the ability to get a unit, but having a hard time finding a unit. So that's something that's very much a part of our ecosystem that we're working to solve for. So just lifting up, sometimes we're doing a lot of work with the HABC team, a lot of work with creating these opportunities through vouchers and dollars, but we still need landlords that's willing to allow clients to rent and use the spaces. So, but thank you for that.
Take a moment of privilege. So for the past decade, I've represented the 11th district, including the entirety of the Central Business District, which on any given night oftentimes encompasses more than half of the city's homeless population. And this is a constant struggle with the communities that I represent. It's something that we talked about during our first meeting, in that oftentimes residents in communities don't understand or fully appreciate why individuals experiencing homelessness are, in their mind, given more rights to public space than residents are. And I'm concerned that while I appreciate the work that you're doing and recognizing that you don't entirely set the policy for encampment, I am concerned that we are splitting hairs about what public space is and what public space is not. When an individual experiencing homelessness is blocking the sidewalk, they are blocking public space. When an individual experiencing homelessness is in Latrobe Park in Locust Point or is in Triangle Park in Upton, they are blocking public space and they are prohibiting other individuals from enjoying that public space or doing unnecessary activities such as driving or walking down the sidewalk. And I think it is incumbent upon the administration to communicate that to communities, because oftentimes it is the council person that the community comes to complains to ask why it is that, Councilman Costello, why are you not doing something about this problem? Well, myself, the rest of the individuals that are sitting up here, and other council members that are not present, just like we don't have the ability to issue a traffic citation because we're not a sworn officer, just like we can't effect an arrest in the state of Maryland because we do not have a firearm and a badge, we are not outreach workers, and we are limited in what it is that we can and can't do. However, when an individual is service resistant and is refusing those services and they reside in a public space, it creates a burden for the rest of the residents that live in that community. And I hope that the administration can appreciate that concern.
Yep, thank you for that, Councilmember Costello. So I want to acknowledge a couple of things. I think I've likely worked with almost every single member of this council personally on your issues with individuals experiencing homelessness. And I recall you and I worked on a specific issue, which was a public space management issue that we were able to resolve, I think in Otterbein specifically. And so what I would hope that members of this body would acknowledge is that when you have reached out to the administration, when it is a true issue of public space, I have worked directly with the director, directly with the outreach team, and directly with BPD to coordinate a response. And we will continue to coordinate that response, and we will continue to follow our own protocols, protocols that call for us advertising that you cannot be in this space. We are required to give, I think, at least 7 days notice and post signs. So there's a process that I want us to be thoughtful about. Now, again, with the encampment resolution protocol, right, if it rises to the level of private property or any number of other issues that are outlined in the encampment resolution protocol, then we might respond, we might be able to respond faster. But again, you can continue to reach out to me. You can continue to reach out to the director, and we will work as diligently as we can to respond, especially if it is in a public space.
Faith, I appreciate that. You have been wildly responsive to me, especially including related to areas that were in your former portfolio as a deputy mayor, and I know that is your expertise and background. So let me clarify and make very clear that what I am saying is not that the administration is non-responsive. What I am saying is that oftentimes it falls on the council member as to why the council member is not doing a thing. And I am further communicating that when individuals reside in public space and it is brought to the attention of the city and they continue to be there and create a nuisance for other individuals that live in the community, it is a concern. And I am suggesting that the administration can do more to communicate with the community as to why the individual has not been removed, because there is an expectation on the part of the community that I can walk down the street and go to the park in my neighborhood and enjoy the park. And it is not my council member's fault that I cannot do that, because there's an individual experiencing homelessness that is residing in the park and engaging in activity that a reasonable person could conclude that individuals experiencing homelessness would be participating in. So that comment was not intended in any way and should not be construed as to result in a defensive response. It is to say that I hope the administration can appreciate that when these issues persist, that there is an additional level of communication and explanation that should be communicated to the community, and it is incumbent upon the administration, because it is the administration that sets this policy. This policy is set not through legislation, which is something that we play a major role in and can control that process. This is a non-legislative policy that the administration has enacted.
I think one of the things I can acknowledge that we can do a better job, and that really is on me, of doing some more community forums so that they can understand what is the role of outreach and what does this encampment protocol looks like versus what does it look like to call into 311, and for us to at least acknowledge and give them a call back in that response. So the two takeaways that I can have from both you, sir, and you can look like, we can absolutely have more community conversations surrounding what our strategy is for outreach and what does the encampment protocol look like for a resolution, as well as just some additional education. I had a chance to meet with the business district as well a couple of weeks ago, and part of what they didn't even know was we use 311 as a communication tool. And if you put in a ticket, we'll be able to call you back and let you know if that ticket has closed out. So I think there is definitely, we can do our part in educating the community surrounding what this looks like, and we can definitely do a better job as a feedback loop, because I hear you lifting that up as something that needs to happen. And I can own that, and we can absolutely do that with our public mediations persons.
And while I'm on my soapbox, and this is not related to the administration or any elected official, it is oftentimes said in communities throughout the city that, well, that wouldn't be tolerated if it was occurring in Federal Hill or Fells Point. And let me be very clear, and I think the councilman from the 1st District who represents Fells Point will speak to this, that this issue is wildly prevalent in communities such as Federal Hill and Fells Point that have a thriving business district. A thriving business district results in pedestrians that are on the street engaging in commerce. Individuals experiencing homelessness have a tendency to be in those areas because of the fact that they are able to solicit funds. So this notion that this is treated differently, and none of my tone is directed at anyone from the administration now, it is at the situation. This notion that this is treated differently in Federal Hill and in Fells Point and other areas of the such is a false notion. It is a false notion. Is that correct, Councilman Cohen? Thank you. Thank you. Faith, you were going to say something.
Yes, so I appreciate your comments. This is a citywide issue, so I do want to acknowledge that. But there's a couple things that I also want to acknowledge. What you see when we see, myself included, when we see individuals experiencing homelessness, we're seeing the manifestations of poverty. Poverty is not sidelined to one particular community. We have a significant issue with poverty in our city. We've been talking a lot about opioids and the drug epidemic, right? These are all the manifestations of the decades-long disinvestment that we've seen in our city. That's what we're seeing when we see individuals experiencing homelessness. Now, what I can acknowledge is that there is work that we can do. The thing that I want us to be thoughtful about is that it didn't take us a year to get here. It's going to take us more than a year, more than a couple of days to solve the issue of homelessness. But what you have is an administration and a director and a CAO that is committed to being responsive and to implementing strategies that are data-driven, that are human-centered to address this issue for the long term. The way that you solve homelessness is through housing. And that is why we're continuing to double down on our investments in permanent supportive housing. So again, I understand the frustrations of this body. I understand the frustrations of the community, which is why I've personally taken this on. If you have residents that are frustrated and want to express their frustration and want to better understand the city strategy, send them my way, send them the director's way. We are happy to do more to communicate our efforts, to communicate our strategy, and to partner with communities on response. I just was earlier last week, I think I was at the Babe Ruth Museum, right? Responded personally to those residents, met with them, brainstormed, ideated with them to come up with a solution for their community. We've done the same in Wyman Park. We've done the same on MLK, and we will continue to do this work in partnership with the community and also continue to intervene for those individuals experiencing homelessness.
Your efforts are not unnoticed, and your efforts are appreciated. I think I can speak for everyone that's sitting up here. I'm taking a moment to verbalize the frustration that we have based on the frustration that is shared with us from the communities we represent. So I think we're all saying the same thing and on the same page here on this issue. Is there anyone that disagrees with that before I move on this? Thank you all for the discussion on this. Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We talked a little bit about, I have not, but everybody had talked a little bit about the operation over at, or the resolution at Wyman Park Dell. That was difficult, as you know, and I'm grateful that we were able to be in constant communication before, during, and now after. It was just clear, and something that I articulated to my constituents, that we want to make sure that there is a space for shelter and then housing for these residents. And I'm really appreciative of the work that your office did and all of the other partners and continue to do to keep that going. I understand the situation with each one and continue to want to make sure that there's that intensive case management, I realize, is very difficult. So I want to appreciate that. I think it's really important that we do it citywide. And I know you're trying to figure out how are we going to do that citywide based on the comments of my colleagues. And it's important to do that because I also feel very strongly that if we cannot house our most vulnerable, what kind of society are we? And I think that you've taken that to heart and are trying to figure this out. You had talked earlier about the outreach teams trying to help people with when they say, no, I'm not ready for shelter or housing, whether it's, a couple trying to stay together or, the pet, but there's two others that you did not mention. And I need to understand, how are we dealing with this? One is the mental health piece. There are people experiencing homelessness that have been experiencing chronic homelessness for a really long time. There's also some that have become homeless recently and just have executive function, other things that they just cannot do, right? The second is substance abuse. I have had it said to me twice from different people that are experiencing homelessness in my district that they want to be found if they are overdosing and are not going into shelter because of that. So this is inextricably linked to the fact that we have a horrific substance abuse crisis in our city. And so I'm just wondering, I'm sure we're going to talk about this when we talk with the health department later on this week, okay? And I know that we have colleagues here that are leading on this effort to figure out not just the overdose piece, but the fact that we have a systems problem relative to substance abuse, right? It's a systems problem. There's no question about it. And that's not us. It's a national problem. Agree. So when our teams are hearing from our residents experiencing homelessness, no, I don't want to go into a shelter because of X, Y, and Z, what are we doing and saying and helping relative to the mental health piece and the substance abuse piece? Because I think we need to address that. And the crisis response, 988, all of that, super important. Glad they're there. They need more funding and more assistance. I think that this is where all of our efforts are extremely important. And I just think that when we're talking about people who are chronically homeless or experiencing homelessness or that are having other issues that they need to deal with, we're not able to provide the services. And so if you could talk a little bit about those pieces, I would really appreciate it.
So I'm going to allow the director to offer remarks, but I just, again, want us to be very thoughtful and intentional in how we talk about and how we frame these issues. I don't want to conflate substance use disorder and homelessness. Right?
Understood, and I agree, but I am saying that it can be a factor in some cases, right? So I'm not saying everybody. We've been clear about everybody's got a different story, everybody's got a different circumstance, and we have to address those circumstances. And that's why this is difficult. That's all I'm saying.
Appreciate it. I'll answer the question from two different lenses. The first one would be part of our approach for the outreach teams does look like, no, I don't want shelter, but can I connect you to substance abuse? Can I connect you to mental health? So we've increased those providers and we're trying to have them go out with us. So they are part of the outreach rotation. They are part of who we can readily refer people to. And then PEP is also one of our outreach providers. So PEP is that integrated mental health. And so what they also have is an ACT team and clinicians in substance abuse. That's a part of their portfolio, and they are a part of our outreach team as well and a part of that service delivery. But what we've looked at doing is just adding on more agencies that's willing to be a part of the outreach work. I'll use Helping Up Mission as an example of an organization that reached out to us. They provide substance abuse treatment and they provide just a wraparound supportive services, but they also do outreach. And so they've been a part of our meetings and they're now a part of our work group. And what we're able to do is refer clients and we're able to get them to come out and talk to people. So it's not just our outreach team that's trying to engage them. Sometimes that just looks like our outreach team alongside with a clinician, alongside with a substance abuse program that can offer those resources and support if they're ready. The other thing that we're looking to do that is very new, I've said it to the police department. I think that they do an amazing job at how they're trying to use data. And one of the things that they came to us with is we have group that they call high utilizers. And what they're looking at is we're seeing them, they're dealing with mental health, they're dealing with substance abuse, they don't want shelter, but are they in your system? Is there something that we can do that we can partner together and figure out what this targeted response looks like? So that's a part of a work group that we're now launching that we're gonna be a part of. But one of the things that we've noticed is, I'll use the gentleman that you had sent me as an example of a person that folks are concerned about. He's not a part of our system at all. He's never interacted with homeless services. He's never interacted with our outreach providers. So we know there are missing gaps of people that everyone's coming in contact with, but they're not a part of our system. And I'm cheating because I meant to send you an email to tell you I looked him up. But what that also did was I have a meeting with BCRI and that director or that executive director for us to talk about what does this intentionality surrounding who we are seeing in our system and who you're seeing in yours, because unfortunately we all use different systems, we're all capturing different items, but I do think the energy is around recognizing that there are folks that you are encountering that are dealing with mental illness, that are in and out of our shelter system. We just don't know who they are, and we can't find them when a housing offer might be made to them. And in some cases, especially those that are dealing with substance abuse that are chronically homeless, they're not navigated. So as such, you're not going to be at the top of a housing intervention because we really don't have your history. We don't have your documentation for that to be a part of the response. So I think as a community, what we're doing is partnering with those organizations that is your area of expertise, and we're doing some intentional work of how can I utilize what we're doing and utilizing our system, your services and supports. To CAO's point, I think that we've done a really good job at understanding that homelessness, substance abuse, and mental health, there's an intersection, but it's not usually the factor that's causing the homelessness, right? That's not the reason that's leading this person to be experiencing homelessness, but it is impacting their ability to get navigated, to stay connected. So we're trying to figure out what is that intersection and how can we bring in providers that normally are not homeless service providers, right? But you are encountering people that we do want to be able to touch. But also, you get into the eligibility conversation, which is a different conversation. If you're coming out of an inpatient substance abuse treatment program, you're not eligible for these COC housing projects. So with so many complexities to each unique person's situation, but I do think that the energy is around understanding this system. And of course, our office's energy is always going to be poured into the agencies that you do that thing and I do this thing. How can we partner to have a holistic approach?
Thank you. I know it's complex and there's a lot of federal rules, there's a lot of state rules and all of that. I do look forward to continuing the conversation offline about that particular piece. My second question is related to the hotels. I'm thrilled that this is moving forward. Just clarify for me what is occurring. My understanding is, so we have purchased the hotels, correct? They are now ours, the city.
Yes.
And they are being used as non-congregate shelter, which is what I think all of us have said is extremely important, particularly for couples, for families, for women. So I'm totally excited about that. And I understand that it was always the intention that at some point in time, we would move towards putting them as permanent supportive, which I also think is also important. I'm wondering what that time frame is. You had said that there's already an RFP starting to go out. I wonder if the timing, I guess the timing is because we're using ARPA money. I just answered my own question. But I think that we're gonna need that non-congregate shelter for a while. And so if it's ARPA money that we're using to be able to turn these into permanent supportive, that answers my question. But there's also gonna be, I think, some ongoing pieces. I really think we're gonna need non-congregate shelter for a longer time. I know we need permanent supportive housing, absolutely, no question about it. And, we have this opportunity. But we also have, some of the other ARPA money I was going to ask you about later, and landlord engagement and all of that. So I guess just clarify for me this timeline into permanent supportive as well.
So the release of the RFP is really about us identifying a developer and being able to select who's going to be able to reasonably take on a project of that magnitude and size. The second layer of that looks like the RFP with HABC of being able to put vouchers into the building. But the second layer of what you're lifting up is the city is continuing to look for additional shelter space because clearly those two locations are serving a phenomenal purpose. And so we're continuing to look for our next space, which is going to be permanent shelter space. We're looking at different sites and different locations now. But one of the things to lift up is the timeline here, Releasing the RFP allows us to identify, do the work with the developer. They have to be able to put together their own capital deck and all of those wonderful things in the voucher. So there's going to be a period of time where there is just planning that's going to have to happen. We intend to continue to use these spaces throughout that planning period. So the release of the RFP is one item, the selection of is another, but the length of time that it's going to take for that developer to have their full capital deck and stack available and actually put a shovel in the ground is a completely different timeline, which is a to be determined. But at the same time, what we're looking for now is what is our next site. We've used both of those spaces, we continue to use them, and we're looking for permanent shelter space.
Is that permanent shelter space going to be non-congregate shelter?
We're looking at a combo. We're looking at a combination of congregate / non-congregate space.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Director. Thank you, CEO. We are now in recess until 6 p.m.